Episode 21. Rotten Apples and a Pickled Lion. The day had to come, and now it has. The universal dread greeting Chez's announcement that tonight is Dorking Cook Night tells its own story. Not that we have yet tasted any food prepared by Mr. and Mrs. Dorking, or their children Sandy and Andy. But the omens are not good. This rather cruel judgment sounds like prejudice against Mr. Dorking, his unfortunate wife and their milk bottle bottom bespectacled son and daughter. In truth, we have grown quite fond of the family and their unique form of decision-making. Any matter, small or large, is subject to the Dorking treatment. First Mr. D musters the troops and summarizes the issue in hand. Then each of them gives their opinion, whereupon Mrs. D considers the 4 options and homes in with deadly accuracy on the worst one. Decision made. This form of democratic dictatorship is used several times a day. It is clearly visible in their uniformly awful dress sense and their choice of matching spectacles, which look like they have been made of reinforced concrete. But before we start to feel too superior, it's worth remembering that they also chose to go on this holiday. To be fair, our twin tour guides did offer to help with the planning and shopping for the evening meal, but the Dorking family committee decided they didn't need it. At least our wonderful new camp on the edge of Moscow has a well-stocked shop, in addition to the proper tents that, according to our Russian hosts, have been specially erected for us. Paul's negotiating skills know no bounds. There's a feeling of optimism in the air, with the promise of a night in a spacious dry tent, followed by a day of sightseeing in Moscow, at least, for those who survive dinner. 40 brown trout, 2 kilos of dried apricots, 20 packs of strawberry jelly, 2 beetroots, 36 loaves of hard black bread and 7 kilos of manky cauliflowers. You can almost tell how many Dorking family conferences were needed to select these ingredients, and they are already over an hour behind schedule. I'm sorry, but it's impossible to draw a veil over Dorking dinner, or rather, midnight misery. In modern Britain, 1969 is not a culinary high point for the vast majority of us. The only decent meal you can eat out comes wrapped in yesterday's newspaper, but nothing has prepared us for this. It's not so much cordon bleu as cordon bleu. Our chefs today decided to oven bake the trout whole, effectively straight from the lake. There are no ovens, so it's on to plan Omicron. Axe the creatures in half and boil in water. Easier said than done when dealing with something as slippery as a Reese mug. But at least it's not a case of trout, the whole trout and nothing but the trout. By now, we are of course starving, so the choice comes down to head or not head. The latter still has all the guts and bones, so heads it is. The head turns out to be not as good as it sounds, but there's always breakfast to look forward to. But this isn't just any breakfast, this is a Dorking breakfast. Cauliflower boiled into submission, presumably to prevent floret syndrome. Beetroot porridge and inverse Irish coffee, in mitigation. The bags of white powder aren't labelled. The milk coffees remain resolutely black, a phenomenon explained by the thick layer of instant mashed potato at the bottom. Now for the exciting bit, a full day's sightseeing in Moscow, a day starting with the coach dropping us in the middle of Red Square. There are no other vehicles in sight, and it seems to me that this is a route normally reserved for parades and rocket launchers, but the big cheer is for our local guide. Tati offers no explanation for her miraculous reappearance, as she immediately points out the main buildings visible from here in the center of Red Square. There's no doubt where the eye is drawn to first, no matter how hard Tati tries to interest us in the history of the square. We are all staring at St. Basil's Cathedral with an expression on our faces that says does not compute. Like the Taj Mahal, we are all familiar with its outlines from photographs, but nothing prepares you for the reality. The Taj Mahal is a beautiful facade, studded with gems. St. Basil's is a gem in itself, even to someone as well-travelled and colour-blind as me. This cathedral is perfect. Not in the normal, restrained way we are used to in Western Europe, but something which makes a direct connection between eyes and guts. Or is that just the trout talking? Inside St. Basil's it's a riot of colour, but a very well-organised one. Gone is the restrained elegance of traditional Byzantine art. This is a full-on Russian experience, like being trapped inside an egg made by Fabergé on a roller coaster, and a pretty emotional one at that. Nobody's told us in 1969 that the Kremlin is full of churches. From what I had seen on TV, I had expected it to be populated by faceless bureaucrats in monolithic brutalist buildings. That turns out to be only half true. On this ancient fortified hill, there is plenty of space for grey-faced Cold War veterans to do their thing. We can't go anywhere near them, of course, but we are happy pottering around beautiful, delicate churches. We have time for a detailed inspection of the giant bell. According to Tati, it's the biggest in the world, of course. It never rang, and the huge crack ensures that it never will. We admire the artistry, the dedication that has gone into this mute instrument, a perfect metaphor for Russia itself. But our next two sites give it a serious run for its money. First, a surreal lunch. We have nearly 2 hours before our next visit, so we are all happy to wander around and get something to eat. Not only are we hungry, but I suspect we also need something to restore our faith in food. We come up with a plan which seems simple enough. Have a leisurely look around Russia's most famous shop and buy a few things for a picnic. It's not going to tell us much about how people in the Soviet Union do their shopping, but the GUM department store is highly recommended by Tati, who seems to be trying to reach her daily propaganda target. You can hardly miss it, occupying a prime spot in the row of grand buildings that make up one side of Red Square. GUM is the shop front of the whole country. The building is certainly impressive. The palace that houses the store is huge and beautifully decorated. It makes Harrods look like the Leicester branch of Argos. But like its relatives all around the world, the display cases in GUM are full of items nobody needs and nobody wants. At one random counter, you can admire an artfully lit selection of meerschaum cigarette holders. The charming sales assistant comes with her own accessories, an abacus and a list of prices in dollars. Only in dollars, even for 1969, the abacus seems hopelessly out of date, particularly as all receipts still have to be handwritten in lowercase Cyrillic script, which looks like the readout from a heart monitor, and it's not as if any locals will get to see one, because there aren't any Russian customers here. These upper floors are dedicated to the Cold War god of hard currency, the almighty dollar. Welcome to the topsy-turvy world of Soviet socialism. Downstairs is a very different story. The area around the entrance and stairs is neat and well ordered, but the further you go into the ground floor departments, the greater the contrast is with the palatial surroundings. This is where the Russians shop and the ruble reigns supreme. I suppose this is more like the authentic Russian shopping experience, but this is still a showpiece emporium. To us, it's more grim than GUM, but to Soviet citizens, this is probably as good as it gets. There may be gold and sumptuous artwork above us, but this is the land of the queue. orderly lines of overcoated people shuffling forward, getting nowhere slowly, people to whom the whole country is supposed to belong. Like the true Western liberals we decide to show our solidarity with the Soviet citizenry by buying a few apples. The ones on display certainly look tempting, at least to those of us on the verge of post-drought stress disorder. Amazingly, the queue for the apples is much shorter than the others. They must be for something really special. There seems to be very little movement, but after a quarter of an hour we get to the sales counter. Brandishing our rubles in one hand and a phrase book in the other, I utter some mangled words which are meant to ask the price of 6 apples. A torrent of angry Russian ensues, along with much gesticulating in the direction of the queue across the hall. Determined to endure the Soviet shopping experience to the full, we sheepishly join the long line. Like lambs to the slaughter, after an interminable amount of standing and shuffling, we get to the table, where I repeat my parrot phrase, which produces the same puzzlement but without the anger. Maybe this time we are getting better at this. Something indecipherable is scribbled onto a scrap of paper and given to us with a gesture towards the next queue, which is still not the one with the apples. We must look crestfallen, because we are ushered towards a family near the head of the line. There's much smiling and gesticulating. Nobody seems to mind our blatant queue jumping, and in a matter of minutes we are exchanging the slip of paper and a couple of rubles for nothing actually. Our new Muscovite friends are completely unfazed by the fact that we have no proof of what we have ordered or what we've paid for it. They lead us cheerfully to the display counter where we entered this retail hell, and they engage in a heated debate with the Gorgon behind the desk. Eventually, a brown paper bag materializes, which we gratefully accept. There's much smiling and handshaking with our newfound friends, and lots of waving exchanged with people who let us go ahead of them in the queue. So here we are, back at our meeting point in Red Square, only 50 meters from the entrance to GUM, with less than 5 minutes to eat our lunch. Fortunately, no one in our shopping party is hungry now. One glance inside the paper bag is enough. 5 wrinkled, worm-holed apples stare back at us. We are constantly being told to eat more fresh fruit, but these specimens haven't been fresh since Granny Smith was a nipper. But the highlight of the day is coming up right now, and Tatty has no trouble in selling us the official line on the life and achievements of Comrade Lenin. His story is very much the history of the Communist Revolution and the founding of the Soviet Union. Tatty even pokes gentle fun at the great revolutionary's nickname, the Lion. It sounds really impressive in Russian.
Lenin Lev.
She tells us in a mock conspiratorial tone, but in English, Lenin the Lion sounds more like a cartoon character. Why don't we pay him a visit now, and you can tell me afterwards what you think? And with that, she leads us across the square and back towards the Kremlin wall. Another queue and more shuffling, but this time there is a definite purpose, to see Lenin in the flesh. But as we edge into the yellowish-green glow at the center of the mausoleum, we are greeted by the sight of a small pickled gentleman. It's a strange sort of immortality, lying in a fish tank in your best suit. It's not ghoulish, but it is sad. This is a strange kind of hero worship, to take a once great man and show his shriveled body to the masses. Whatever was special about Lenin is no longer there, and the experience has not had much effect on me, but I think it may be a long time before I can eat another gherkin. Still, it's good to be able to cross it off my bucket list. Formaldehyde Bolshevik, check. And it does give me the chance to write in the remembrance book, "Hello Lenin, liked your grad." A hunt for a single metaphor that sums up the old Soviet Union seems doomed to failure. Not surprising perhaps for the complex giant the Union has become in the Cold War 1960s. Here's one last attempt to give you at least a different perspective on the country and its people. On our way back to Germany and all points west, our driver Tiny is steering us confidently through the part of the Soviet Union known as White Russia, which is at the time of writing the independent country of Belarus. We are approaching Minsk, the state capital. It gradually becomes clear that there is something seriously wrong. Paul and Cheza are engaged in a furiously whispered conversation, and even Tiny looks sheepish. With good reason. The driver was entrusted with most of the money needed to get us home. This is long before the days of bank cards. So Tiny always keeps a thick wad of notes in a wallet sticking out of his back pocket, or not always as it turns out. By now, we are in Minsk, but the money must still be back in Moscow. Tiny manages to find a parking place right outside the main railway station, and Paul goes in to find a payphone. Half an hour later, she emerges, looking relieved but puzzled. The wallet has been found and the cash is still there. Tiny had slept in his tent with the money under his pillow for safekeeping. All Paul knows is that the money will be on the evening train from Moscow. It's clear that we are going to be here for some time, so we set up camp by the bus. We are not exactly in the outback, but our Antipodean partners know what to do. We might as well make ourselves comfortable. Camp beds appear, miraculously transformed into sun loungers. Cala gas burners come out, the English minus the Dorkings, make tea. A couple of wooden boxes are found, presumably in a nearby skip, and the Italians set up an impromptu hair salon. All this is much to the amusement of the good people of Minsk, who are too reticent to do more than give us a warm smile as they pass by. But this is the Soviet Union, and it's only a matter of time before a hardliner comes along and harangues the decadent Westerners. His tone is harsh and his manner pugnacious, but he soon realizes that none of us speak Russian. Eventually our campsite visitor targets the most colorful of our gang, the no longer Harry Mary. Trotsky, as Cheza has already named our new guest, tries speaking Spanish, which he does so badly that even I can understand him. He tells us proudly that he learned the language when he was out in Cuba. Mario answers in Italian, not the best basis for a heavyweight political debate. I don't get much from the ensuing argument, except that Trotsky is a retired professor, which I take to mean he used to be a teacher. Mario is a student in Bologna studying politics and philosophy. I also gather that Trotsky thinks we are a bunch of effete capitalists, and that Mario asserts that Trot's mother was a solicitor, presumably not one in the legal profession. Entertaining as this all is, our attention is drawn in the direction of the station, where a young madwoman is running towards us, holding something aloft and emitting some most unladylike noises. By the time Paul reaches our ramshackle camp, we have all spotted the wallet stuffed full of banknotes. I can't bloody believe it, she pants. The bloke at the campsite goes to the station and hands this over to the guard of the next train to Minsk. No bag, no nothing. The guard passes it to someone official looking in the station here, who looks for me and gives to me. Just like that. It's all there, she says, handing it back to Tiny. We are happily packing up our impromptu camp and barber's shop when we come across a snag. Mario and Trotsky are sitting on the pavement, vodka bottle in hand, arms round each other's shoulders, singing a slurred medley of national anthems. Now that must be a metaphor for something, mustn't it?